The inaugural India-US 2+2 dialogue is over. The American delegations have left for the US. Time to take a look at what we've achieved on both sides.
Surya, you were there at the press conference. The joint statements were read out there by both the sides, two ministers on both sides. What is your immediate takeaway from that?
Well, in looking at it in purely diplomatic terms, you can see that there is a strong strategic convergence, especially in the area of the Indo Pacific. Both sides using identically the same language. I don't know if they read from the same document, but they talked about freedom of navigation, sovereignty of territorial waters, the need to protect the centrality of ASEAN to this entire region, which is basically the South China Sea.
Right.
So clearly there is going to be strategic convergence between India and the US, especially in this area,
Right.
which suits the US admirably. I'm sure it suits us also, since we can't take on China on our own. Of course, there were differences, I think, over Russia. These were not played up.
Right.
The focus was on the positive, but clearly this is something we will have to work towards as we go forward, because this is a huge issue in the US.
It will remain an irritant between India and US.
Absolutely.
The Russian shadow will be long.
Absolutely, and that raises a lot of questions about the S-400.
That's right.
We'll have to see how that plays out in the days ahead.
What about Pakistan, Afghanistan?
Well, they didn't say very much. They, in broad terms, they looked at terrorism. Both sides largely agree. There was a reference to 26/11 and 9/11. But beyond that, I think there are differences in how the two sides see Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Right.
And I think that's one area they don't want to get into at this point.
But they did mention some of these terrorist organizations. I think they were mentioned by name. Lashkar-e-Taiba.
Those groups were mentioned, and there was
Right.
also reference to the UN Convention on Terrorism and what the intelligence sharing and information sharing that the two sides should do to take this forward. So clearly there is a consensus in that area too.
But so India can live with that. I mean, India cannot expect US to completely abandon Pakistan at this moment, given what it does for US in Afghanistan.
Absolutely, I don't think we want the US to do that either, because at the end of the day, perhaps the US is the only restraining force left on Pakistan, and we don't know how China will play out.
Right. What about Iran?
Iran, I think that's again a bit of a question mark there. November 4th deadline is not very far away, and we'll have to see how that plays out. Although the waiver power is there with the president,
Right.
how he'll exercise it is the question.
So I think actually the president has both the powers to waive sanctions against Russia on a case-by-case basis. The Congress has authorized him,
Yeah.
and on what they do with Russia, what other countries do with Russia. And with Iran, I think the Americans should be happy that India is now sourcing increasingly higher amount of crude oil or the hydrocarbon products from the US. I'm told the last figure was about $4 billion.
And probably going up.
And going up. So that should satisfy the Americans.
Given the transactional nature of this current administration.
That's right.
But what again interested me was the military component, which
That's
I think you'd be.
Yeah, in fact, COMCASA was not expected to be signed, so that was a pleasant surprise in that sense. It enables the US high technology communication equipment now to be sourced or shared by Indian armed forces, and also gives a secure communication to both the American and the US interoperability that comes in. But interestingly, what I found more interesting, apart from COMCASA, which was anyway, the text was finalized, it was only a question of timing when you were supposed to sign it, is the fact that innovators on both sides are now able to come on a common platform in defense innovation. So defense products, small MSMEs, or MSMEs coming into the picture to develop products for both, especially for the Indian Armed Forces. That is the second point. The third is, of course, the Make in India invitation that India has reiterated, that American companies can come and start manufacturing or have JVs in India. And the naval maritime cooperation that they spoke about. I think they spoke about the NAVCENT, that is the naval CENTCOM, where an Indian officer is now being designated to be represented there as a liaison officer.
Sir, I was just wondering, what is the value of that? How does it, is it a step towards entering CENTCOM? Is this something else here?
It is both yes and no step towards entering CENTCOM, because India's main focus and American focus has been on what is called the Indo Pacific command. Now they have called the Hawaii based command, which used to be Pacific command, now it's called Indo Pacific. their concentration is on Pacific. India wants, and India's definition of Indo-Pacific is from eastern shores of Africa to the western Pacific, and therefore India wants a foot in the Central Command, the American Central Command, which looks after the area between Africa and India's shores. So that is one of the reasons why India wants that kind of arrangement with the CENTCOM.
Well, I was speaking to one of our former diplomat who's a consultant, and he was mentioning that this foot in the CENTCOM door is good, but India shouldn't aspire to membership of CENTCOM, because then the value for the US in terms of how we are placed diminishes.
Exactly. So I think India should not be over ambitious in that. India should just look at how they can leverage their presence in Bahrain, is where the NAVCENT is located, and therefore I think overall, as we see it from diplomatic point of view and defense point of view, and defense certainly drives this relationship.
Absolutely.
So trade, I don't think they spoke too much about. That is a separate dialogue, because there are a lot of differences. But all in all, at the end of it, I think the first inaugural or the inaugural 2+2 dialogue should be seen as a consolidation of the partnership, and a success for both sides.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So on that note, this is Nitin Gokhale,
Surya Gangadharan,
signing off for Strategic News International.